So somebody sent me this article. Actually, I think Let's Be Frank did, to be perfectly honest with you. And I was looking at this article, and I'm like, yo, this is... I need evidence. You know what I'm saying? Like, I need some evidence to back this up to understand what's going on, right? So what's that mean? It means Tom Peace has to do some research. And by the way, welcome back. You know what I'm saying? Like, yo, notice, real setup, real shit, actual things going on. You know what I mean? Real motherfucking rig, getting it done. We're back, baby. We're going to get this done. You know what I mean? Handle our business and do what we do best out here on Pnoid News, which is bring you the motherfucking news. So, I got this article, right? It's from, I think, the True Pundit, right? Which is kind of like a bullshit source, which is why I got two more lined up after this. I will leave the links in the description so that you can see what's going on. All right. Deep State vows payback after Trump disrupts million in illegal drug trafficking cash and kickbacks from Syria. Now, look, here's the thing. I don't like to say things legitimately or co-sign what anybody else says unless there's some legitimate evidence behind it. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not going to say that this is absolutely true, but there's a lot of stuff going on here that I think should be having a conversation about. Because if this is about the drug trade, we all know how the CIA gets down. All right. So, high-placed federal law enforcement sources dropped a bombshell claiming a renewed push to impeach the president is rooted in part in President Trump removed to pull the United States out of the conflict in Syria and stop untold millions in dirty cash from flowing into the deep state's pockets, CIA. This wasn't the Kurds. This isn't about the Kurds. It's about the cash, one FBI source said. This is from October 19th, by the way. Somebody just posted it up today like it was a new thing. And I mean, I really hadn't heard a whole lot about this at all. Like, I heard nothing about this. So this is new to me. And that cash is no chump change. It's millions and millions of dollars flowing to the coffers of crooked politicians and deep state pockets worldwide. Yeah. That's an actual truth right there. That's a legitimate truth. You know what I mean? So, federal sources paint a dark picture here, alleging crooked politicians and their benefactors are fuming. For years, it's alleged deep state players have been raking in millions in illicit profits through the manufacturing and distribution of narcotics in Syria. Now, that I ain't never heard before. New news to me. If y'all knew about it, good for y'all. You know what I'm saying? Take a victory lap. But I had no clue. I didn't hear anything about this shit. But that profitable network could stop producing its riches for U.S. players if the ceasefire Trump negotiated continues, and if Trump's plan to remove U.S. personnel from Syria commences. Back here in the U.S., Trump faces a new and angrier wave against angst from D.C. players and politicians who have launched an even more rabid push to remove him from the White House. There's panic, one source said. There's a lot of connected people making a lot of money through their contacts in Syria, and that's going to dry up fast. The byproducts of such anxiety, crooked U.S. politicians put in fabricated allegations against Trump to impeach. ISIS prisoners being released by frustrated deep state players as payback, and even an emergency Middle East road trip by Speaker Nancy Pelosi and senior members of Congress to Jordan, which also happens to be a major trafficking route for Syrian drug distribution in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Iraq, some of the largest markets in the world for Syria's meth pills. Now, all right, so the problem is they mentioned Jordan here, and Jordan does. It's like, believe it or not, Jordan's one of our first allies that we ever had in our nation's history. Legit, like, we worked with them. We were fighting the pirates during Thomas Jefferson's days. Just something that you may or may not know. Coincidence. Trump has sabotaged a golden goose for the deep state, knowingly or not. With the deep state dogging Trump with faux scandals in an attempt to remove him from the White House at every turn, you have to wonder if Trump's foreign policy in Syria is targeting the millions of dollars that politicians and their deep state connections are lining their pockets with, in the U.S. and other countries too. The network, the money, and the amount of legal narcotics coming out of Syria are massive. Syria is supplying the entire Middle East with a very potent pill form of meth called captagon. Syria's captagon is being trafficked through Europe and Africa, but Syria is also producing the ingredient to make other forms of meth worldwide. Another Syrian product line being trafficked with huge profits even here in the United States. Also, ISIS fighters are not only using this drug, but their bosses are profiting from its distribution and using the products to expand the global footprint of the terror conglomerate. That's another wrinkle in this sordid secret story. The FBI and DEA have shared frustrations about fighting factions in the State Department to clamp down on millions of pills being manufactured in Syrian labs. Efforts to track and stop the worldwide distributions have resulted in a tug-of-war inside of D.C. In June, the FBI tipped off Greek authorities about a captagon shipment the U.S. feds tracked out of the port of Latakia, Syria. The Greeks intercepted a shipment of lumber shrouding 33 million captagon pills with a street value of $700 million. So these pills are worth about $20 a clip, or maybe a little more depending on where you sell them, especially in a better country. That's one shipment worth 600 to 700 million. The math checks out, right? One federal source said this is a multi-billion-dollar operation, and Trump just shut it down for many U.S. players. Again, perhaps as a way to stick it to the same folks who are trying to take him down. Regardless, we're getting a glimpse into the money war behind the political war unfolding in D.C. In December, a Syrian freighter en route from Latakia to Libya was intercepted near Crete with 3 million phenethylene pills worth 113 million. Syrian-made captagon pills, locally known as Abu Halalain, aka the father of two moons, because each pill bears a logo of two crested moons, were impounded in France in 2017. In 2016, the International Narcotics Control Board, INCB, flagged concern over Syria's import of pseudoephedrine, of legally traded nasal decongestant used to make highly addictive, powerful methamphetamines, though not Captagon, skyrocketed. Tablets destined for Gulf countries are regularly seized in Lebanon, once from a Saudi prince, sometimes have been moved across the Syrian border in Jordan. 47 million Captagon pills were reportedly confiscated in 2018, according to Jordan's Public Security Directorate, and the Maryland-based National Center for Biotechnology Information now describes Syria as the premier producer and exporter of counterfeit forms of Captagon. The drug, which gives a faster high than traditional amphetamine, has for years been a favorite among ISIS favorites, but its export from the country through ports like Latakia are controlled by the Bashar Assad government, suggested the Syrian regime might now be turning the phenethylene sales to internationally bolster its treasury. At the very least, suggest experts, it might be allowing corrupt officials to carry out trade in illegal substance to keep them loyal. You know how this one goes. It is plausible to think that with this amount of money involved, corruption and rent-seeking is a widespread practice, said Malizar Gabi, lecturer at Oxford University, and the export of the Middle East drug politics, and with shrinking sources of revenue, all the more logical. Captagon, Biocaptain, and Fitin were the brand names for the drugs whose main addictive ingredient is phenethylene, which was legal in the U.S. until 1981, when its addictive properties saw it categorized as a Schedule I drug alongside heroin and cocaine. When legal in the 1960s and 70s, used to calm hyperactive children and for parents suffering from narcolepsy and depression. By 1986, it was banned in most countries, yet as with most narcotics, the ban only drove production underground, with its southeastern Europe emerging as the manufacturing hub. Faced with increasing international pressure, production shifted to the Middle East after 2011. Until then, Syria had no history as a manufacturer or exporter of the drug. Unlike Afghanistan, another nation at war, that has been a poppy exporter for decades. While the extent of the Syrian regime's direct role in the export of the drug is hard to determine, a combination of the war-crippling international sanctions and the destruction of much of its regular economy have forced the government to look for new ways to make more money. Warner Sip, the INCB president, said in 2016 that very high amounts of pseudoephedrine and other precursors ordered by Syria had subsequently disappeared. He warned that narcotics from those drugs might be manufactured and produced for exporting. The INCB asked Syria for explanation, but hasn't received one yet. There's a reason why phenethylene is Syria's export of choice. It's one of the most sought-after narcotics in the Middle East. In Saudi Arabia, the pill, which contains caffeine and quinine, a painkiller more popular than cocaine, weed, heroin, or ecstasy. Captagon is also becoming increasingly popular in United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and North Africa, while a batch of 200 sells for $70 in Lebanon. In wealthy Gulf states, a single pill can fetch between $10 and $20. All right, so I wanted to stand here and bring you these stories, and the main reason why is because I wanted, I read that about the deep state, and I go, makes sense, but I don't have any evidence, right? I never even heard of this Captagon stuff, but I think it's important that we understand that maybe the illegal drug trade is now mixed up with the oil and nonsense that's going on. Like, this Middle East shit is fucking bananas. All right, so captagon, the amphetamine fueling Syria's civil war. The drug widely used in the Middle East but unknown elsewhere is keeping fighters on their feet during grueling battles and generating money for more weapons. This is from an actual fucking newspaper, The Guardian, right? Which, so if The Guardian's printing some shit, it's real. Well, they do good reporting for a lot of stuff, legitimately. As Syria sinks even deeper into civil war, evidence is starting to emerge, and this is from January 2014, starting to emerge that brutal and bloody conflict has left more than 100,000 people dead and displaced as many as 2 million is now also being fueled by both the export and consumption of rapidly increasing quantities of illegal drugs. Separate investigations by the news agency Reuters and Time magazine have found that the growing trade in Syrian-made captagon, an amphetamine widely consumed in the Middle East but almost unknown elsewhere, generated revenues of millions of dollars inside of the country last year. Some of which has almost certainly used to fund weapons, while combatants on both sides are reportedly turning the stimulant to help them keep fighting. According to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, Syria has long been a transit point for drugs coming from Europe, Turkey, and Lebanon, destined for the wealthy Gulf states. But the breakdown of law and order, collapse of the country's infrastructure, and proliferation of arms groups have now turned into a major producer. Reuters says production in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, a traditional center for the drug, fell 90% last year from 2011, with the decline largely attributed to production inside of Syria. So basically, when they stood here and they broke down, Syria's fucking, the Assad regime, right? When they broke that down, they ended up creating a situation where, you end up with a massive drug problem because nobody the fuck's in charge. Neither investigation found conclusive evidence that the warring sides were using profits from the drug directly to buy weapons, but both quoted experts and officials as saying it was highly likely. A former U.S. Treasury official, Matthew Levitt, pointed out the Iranian-funded Lebanon-based military group Hezbollah, which is robustly backing Syria's Assad regime, has a long history of dabbling in the drug trade to help with the funding. I'm not even going to try. Head of the Drug Enforcement Unit in Lebanon, with more than 12 million captagon tablets were seized last year, said that most of the illicit pills were hidden in trucks passing from Syria to Lebanese ports, where they were shipped to the Gulf. He suspected proceeds from the drug were being used at least partly to fund anti-Assad rebels inside of Syria. So who were the anti-Assad rebels? Oh, that's right. Those are the ISIS individuals who we were funding. I wonder, right? Like, this is where it gets interesting, right? So, if we were funding ISIS in Syria and we created ISIS and they're being funded by drug money, who's funding the drug money? Captagon, the trademark name for the synthetic stimulant phenethylene, was first produced in the 1960s to treat hyperactivity, narcolepsy, and depression, but was banned in most countries in the 80s as it was too addictive. It remains hugely popular in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia alone seizes some 55 million tablets a year, perhaps 10% of the total thought to be smuggled into the kingdom. The drug is cheap and simple to produce, using ingredients that are easy, often legally obtained, yet sells for up to $20 a tablet. A Lebanese psychiatrist, Ramzi Haddad, said that captagon had the typical effects of a stimulant, producing a kind of euphoria. You're talkative, you don't sleep, you don't eat, you're energetic. But those effects explain why fighters from most of the warring parties in the conflict, with the exception of Al-Qaeda-linked groups, which mostly hold to a strict interpretation of Islamic law, are now said to be making extensive use of captagon. Often on night missions or during particularly grueling battles, but doctors and psychiatrists say the use of drugs is also becoming widespread among Syria's increasingly desperate civilian population. In the coming year, the results will define a country for a generation. These are perilous times. Over the last few years, much of what the Guardian... All right, that's an ad for the Guardian. They want you to donate. Don't donate to them motherfuckers. They're worthless. All right, so I got one more thing to show you. This here, right... Man, what the fuck is this bullshit? I don't know. Let me see if I can interact with it. Okay, so this here is Syria. Hang on a second. Let me fucking stand here and make that big. Word, interact. Okay, so Syria and the wider region. This is actually like a real study. The nexus of conflict and illicit drug trafficking, Syria and the wider region, November 2016. This is from Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, WMO World something building, second floor, 7 Bis Avenue de la Pax, Geneva, Switzerland, right? This is like actual scientific shit, right? Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Okay, so I'm going to read you a little bit of this because I guess the video is getting long. The conflict of Syria has raged for over 5 years, creating massive destruction and human misery. Over 5 million people have fled Syria and over 6.6 million are internally displaced. Much of the suffering and conflict is being maintained by actors turning to a variety of illicit funding and increasingly trafficking in the drug captagon. Unlike many other drugs, the primary destination markets for captagon is countries in the Arab Peninsula and increasingly Syria and Syrian diaspora. Captagon has emerged as a conflict drug, helping to sustain the war for other drugs, particularly Afghan-sourced heroin, and the instability and conflict has the opposite effect of moving trajectories away from Turkey and Syria and the north through the Black Sea. Many long-established drug trafficking networks for a more stable environment to that found in Syria and neighboring countries. With Syrian people living under extreme conditions often turn to drug use, while soldiers from all parties of the conflict can use the drug as a combat stimulant. 6 million Syrian migrants and refugees in neighboring countries are in a risk community to drug use, acting as mules to pay for their travel to European countries. Though the challenge of illicit drug trafficking and production in Syria is not new, it has become a reliable war drug for many actors. International interest by law enforcement in drug trafficking is often limited by domestic political concerns, yet there are long-term public health and rule of law consequences for development and law enforcement actors that, unless directly recognized now and responses planned in post-conflict Syria, will lead to more suffering and instability in the region. This report looks at the current impact of drug trafficking and conflict in Syria and neighboring countries, discussing trajectories, development, organized crime, response to the challenge, and opportunity conflict joints. Key findings. This is all I'm going to read you. Drug trafficking is impacting the rule of law and extensive and chronic. This must be factored in the development and implementation in a post-conflict Syria. Development policy should have mid to long-term focus on understanding the local needs, conflicts, and development of rule of law as a cornerstone for success. Conflict in southern Turkey has shifted much of the Balkan route of Afghan opiates away from Turkey into the Caucasus and across the Black Sea. Turkish OCGs are exploiting the Black Sea trajectories due to perceived increased risk and instability of moving Afghan opiates through Turkey. Captagon production with Syria has been occurring for at least a decade. The current conflict has exploited the breakdown of the rule of law to intensify production and trafficking with the direct involvement and enrichment of the actors in the conflict. Message. Right, most pill seized in the region contain amphetamine base rather than fentanyl captagon, although some seizures in Turkey have contained phenethyline. The current level of conflict with Syria has forced some traffickers to move production to captagon to Lebanon and Turkey and potentially other countries within the region, including Sudan. If the conflict worsens for either of the regimes, FSA or ISIS, and extremist groups, captagon drug trafficking could be moved on a large scale to neighboring countries. Trajectories for captagon produced in Syria are by land, sea, and air, controlled by OCGs affiliated with forces on the ground. Within the area of control, sea trajectories include containers of captagon and other drugs transiting Libya for redirection to other countries in North Africa and the Middle East. Ain't that weird? Syria and Turkish OCGs are working directly with non-state actors such as FSA and extremist Islamic groups to produce captagon within Syria to facilitate exportation. It is unclear if ISIS is a net exporter of captagon due to the other more reliable sources of funding, oil and extortion. However, there are clear links between tramadol trafficking and ISIS. Huge data gaps remain regarding captagon uses in Syria and neighboring countries, as well as destination markets, particularly among Syria refugee populations. Destination markets for captagon are predominantly in the Arab Peninsula and East Africa, with consumption in Turkey and Syria also rising precipitously. Drug trafficking and serious organized crime are significant challenges to some countries in the region due to newer priorities and limited capacity of drug trafficking as a secondary or tertiary priority to law enforcement. Limited reliable information on drug use and prevalence in Syria and the region. So, is the U.S. politicians and CIA and FBI and DEA and all these motherfuckers standing here lining their pockets with cash from drugs from overseas? I absolutely fucking believe it. And it's kind of like that scene in the end of American Gangster, when Frank Lucas finds out that there's not going to be anybody in Vietnam to get his drugs out anymore. It is what it is. Like, this is what happens in war, and these are the things that happen a lot. Drug trades get built up, and bad things happen. There's a reason why this war is pushed on for 18 fucking years. 19 now, really. This war was a person to be old enough to vote. That's a strange thing to say these days. Anyway, man, I'm Tom Pease with Pnoid News. Wanted to bring you the research. You come to your own conclusion. I came to mine. Peace be like one. Later.